we think we're the subject and God is an object, but really God's the subject. And we're the objects of his mind. And that he bees us into being just like we bee our own imaginative characters into being. And once we stop imagining, the character is gone.
Yehuda Katz, a few months ago, I sent you some questions, and you told me that you were passionate about meaningful life and meaningful Judaism, Torah Sod and Kabbalah, which is the secret, the esoteric side of Judaism, human well-being and earth well-being, informal education and experiential education, music, art, dance, green energy, environmental rehabilitation, and waste management. Because that was a few months ago, and people change over a few months, is there anything you'd like to correct or disagree with or amend to that list?
Not anything that's like necessarily out there. No.
That all stands relevant. At the time, you were studying in Yeshivat Othniel, Talmud and Kabbalah. You're studying also
Still
in
doing
Herzog.
that.
You're still in
That's
Othniel.
current. Yeah.
I'm guessing you're doing that from a distance now, though.
Yeah, we're starting tomorrow is our first class in Naran Chai. Let me know, by the way, if there's like Hebrew things I should be saying in English.
Yeah, let's try translate as much as we can into English.
So tomorrow I have my class that I'm attending by Rav Daya on the 5 levels of the soul.
Nice.
So,
nice. I want to hear more about Rav Daya later in the interview, because I know it's someone who's quite incredible.
What
what you're allowed to say. You are studying in a education program called Lifnei V'Lifnim.
Yeah.
Is that still happening?
That is. It's an informal education program that focuses on creative expression and psychology and spiritual expression.
Nice.
Yeah, it's really amazing.
And at the time, you were teaching an informal class on an introduction to Kabbalah. Is that still going?
So I was teaching to the second-year students an intro to Kabbalah, and that has stopped since Corona. I had meant to do one last class before this all started, and I have the materials to do so on the Partsufim on that concept in Kabbalah, which I don't know how to translate. On the persona Torah, but I never was able to do that. Now one of the said, like, why don't you do it? You can do it through YouTube and record it and send out a link. But I like using a board. I don't have a whiteboard.
Oh, that's okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting how like all of the educational challenges that this time poses and the ways that people are finding to get around it.
Including finding a teaching job, yeah.
That's something that you're also doing now?
I have I've been in touch with at least 18 schools.
Wow, that's incredible.
And some have gotten back in touch with me, some haven't. So I'm just a normal application job process, applying to as many places that seem like they could be good places for me, and just waiting. Nice. And also trying to do what I can, but not being pushy,
For sure.
or over pushy.
For sure. And at the time you were reading, and we spoke yesterday or 2 days ago about what you're reading, and there was a tremendous amount of primary Kabbalistic texts, Shari Ora by Yosef Jigatilia, Pirkei Chales, Pardes Remedim from the Ramah, Kisvei Arizal, Reish Milenberg of Cook, a really extensive list of very rich and deep primary texts. And I think that still remains true from what I know.
Yeah, I mean, some of the list, is like a little varied now, and like I can go more into that, but I don't know if that's relevant.
What I want to do is I want to pose a question which will hopefully lead you into some autobiographical sharing, as much as you're willing to.
Okay.
And then we will get back into your interests. But the question is, how did it come to be that Yehuda Katz got interested in all of these aforementioned subjects? What is the story of Yehuda Katz?
So I grew up in Houston, Texas. I grew up in a modern Orthodox family, emphasis on the modern. And I always had a tendency to what I would say more spiritual, artistic tendencies. Nothing that I, necessarily learned about, or I just, I always believed in God. I always thought just the topic of angels was interesting. How that meets me today is totally different, but just, I have had some times where I was in the most deep, dark places, and I still believed in God, and I still had a certain faith, and it wasn't necessarily keeping law or Torah as its many facets, but more on just I believe in God and wanting to submit myself, and that's had a lot of different expressions in my imagination of what that means. And I liked sports and stuff like that, but I also was the guy in the class that was also into art. That was also into kind of more, I don't know if that's more left brain, I don't, or more, some tapping into more Eastern parts of the world in terms of spiritual expression. It isn't necessarily something I really delved into. It was just something like I, in a weird sense, identified with in a deep way that I didn't necessarily talk about either with people. And after doing high school in a small modern Orthodox school, so I also felt like my abilities to express that were limited. I would also, I would engage in dancing and art in school with friends, without friends alone. But my spiritual development was something that wasn't really I didn't have the place or the means to grow in that sense. My school, no offense, was not capable of providing me with that on a religious level, on any level, really. I had one Jewish philosophy teacher that I did connect to. Her name is Atara Siegel. She is still somebody that I'm in touch with, and is somebody that has impacted my life. She kind of got me talking in class more about philosophical ideas, but that's also something that I don't really connect to today so much as in philosophy. More, the Hebrew word would be ruchani, or spiritual, even though the word spiritual has such a loaded word now. So whereas something that's associated with the Hebrew word ruach, I much more connect to for some reason. And then I came to Israel, and that was kind of like a bridge, a kind of switch of bringing things that I liked and gave it a lot of vessels for development and expression. So in a certain sense, Israel kind of became like a womb that I dipped in. And my life is kind of like, since then, has been divided between certain programs that I've done that have been very much womb and internal development like, and also weaning like, in terms of emotional development, and also growing up and trying to find my path of what I want to do with my life, and how I can take the things that I've learned and live them, how to live, and also then give to others through teaching. So Israel brought me to different schools, like Oraita, where I learned first about Kabbalah. I obviously heard of Kabbalah, but like everything I knew was what the normal average person knows, which is not necessarily positive. And it's very much loaded with, oh, that's kind of freaky, or that's kind of, and I kind of, all of my Judaism kind of, I remember like my rabbi, Rav David Aaron, I think it was him that said, everything everything you knew once, it's like it's not how you need to see things. All the baggage that you've built on about God, about spirituality, about Judaism, that's something that here it can be revived, or it's not just revived, it's looking at everything with it's a paradigm shift. And since then, since going to Raita my first year, it's just only been an incline. The decline, there's obviously many declines. The declines just add to the incline. And after a Raita for 2 years, I say the second year, I developed myself, making the decision to live in Israel, to immigrate, and also to become more engrossed in Kabbalah. Although I focused on that my first year. My second year was also more trying to get in to the world of Talmud. But also I met a second teacher that has helped me develop spiritually, which is Rav Ariel Mays. I'd also would like to add that my teacher, I've had many teachers, Rav Yair Eisenstock Halevi. He was the person in my life in my first year in Israel that basically showed me and taught me that you can be totally authentic as Yehuda Katz in your Judaism, and that the highest level of serving God is through self-expression, even if people will look at you and laugh at you or think you're crazy. So if it's yelling your head off, lifting your hands during prayer, any kind of moving like nobody's business, any kind of thing like that, doing what's out of the box, doing stuff. Your Judaism doesn't have to be, the Hebrew word's binali. It doesn't have to be, that's
banal,
the
however it's pronounced. Yeah.
Your Judaism doesn't have to be standard. It can be something that is unique and special and has magic to it and color to it. And that's one of the most meaningful conversations I've had with him once. We were on the rooftop looking up over the old city in Jerusalem, and we were talking to each other about how rich Judaism doesn't really want you to wear black and white. Judaism wants you to wear as many colors as possible, and that's what the high priest does. His garment is the many colors of the breastplate of the Choshen, and the many colors on his garment of blue and red and gold and white, and just an array of colors. And that's the person that enters the Holy of Holies. And how far this black and white view of Judaism has just made things, just only black and white. And he just added so much richness. So I've had Rav David Aaron, Rav Benny Friedman, Rav Ariel Mays, Rav Yair Eisenstock Halevi, another teacher of Davidal Weinberg. There's a lot of people who've had this totally enriching experience, more than an experience. And then I moved to Israel and continued my journey to Otniel, where all of what I knew just totally went on into this machine that made it so much more acute and accurate and rich and skill-based and Hebrew, and developing my Aramaic and just self-expression, because that yeshiva Otniel totally, especially when I first went there, bullet points who you are in your worship, but also is a serious place that focuses on skills. And it's there that I also started thinking, what do I want to do after this? Which is where the teaching gets in. And I just developed, thank God I can really look back and say how much I've developed since my first year in Israel. I'm currently thought of as an 8th year student in the world of yeshiva. And just within those 8 years, how much things have really expanded. And my spiritual teachers in Oraita, I had also so many there. I had Rav M. I'm still there. And afterwards, they'll continue to be Rav M, HaKohen, Rav Benny, Kalmanzin, in Hasidut, Rav M, just in general. taught me so much, and continue Rav Matanya Sternberg, Rav Amnon Dekov, and Rav Dayanagar, who I'm currently learning with for a second year, and just totally got me into so much. And going to Herzog just developed it as a, teacher oriented, and Lifnai V'Lifnim, that program totally got me more evolved in self-expression about creative writing and improv drama, and I learned how to play guitar, and I, over the course of Otniel, my singing got better, and just so many different arrays, and meeting many amazing people like yourself, also just in this journey about what people are interested in, and how much there is to learn. And I noticed over those years, like, how much Judaism has offered me in terms of meaningful living, and like how, I feel like a lot of people are seeking and looking for that, and how I feel like I've kind of tapped into this wellspring that God has really just blessed me with. Like, it's insane. I think God about it often, and how much it's just enriched my life. But it's not just, it's like something greater than me, which is why it's so crazy. So yeah.
Is it a journey that you ever could have expected, or like do you look back in like just total amazement and shock?
I never would have expected it. Never in a million years, since I was in, anybody that stayed more than 1 year in Israel in my community was seen as like, oh, what happened to that guy? But it's not even just me being in Israel. It's just about the whole journey. Like, it's everything that I would have wanted and beyond in infinity sense of ways. But I didn't, when I didn't know what I just didn't know what was out there, and I didn't have any exposure. I didn't have any people guiding me in my life that was like an actual inspirational figure in any meaningful way, especially spiritually. But yeah,
I'm wondering, like, talking to you, like, I don't know, like 10, 15 years ago, and like telling you that like this is where you'd be now, like trying to getting your reaction.
I think like I kind of would be speechless.
Mm.
I wouldn't. I think I'd be internally grateful, which is just a reflection of how I feel now, obviously. But because I never would have, like, yeah, it's that silence. It's
Yeah.
that silence that the Gemara talks about, of that the Talmud brings up, of be quiet, and the expression is shtok v'ale b'machshava. Be silent because there's no words to it. It's just you're in your mind, or even beyond the mind. It's just like,
Wow.
it's an idea that I've been looking around, like just studying within the last few days.
What's the idea?
The idea, I know I got myself something. The idea is about, in the Bahir, it talks about this expression of
Just briefly, what's the Bahir for those that don't know? Just very briefly.
The Bahir is one of the primary texts of Kabbalah before the Zohar became the primary text, and it is debated when it was written. If I'm not mistaken, Gershom Shalom in his, I have books here. I came prepared. Gershom Shalom in his book Kabbalah. I think he associates it to the times of province. After the Gaonic period, after the 11th century. And Aryeh Kaplan has the book Bahir in Hebrew and English, and it talks about there just this idea. He mentions an expression that's a Talmudic expression, be quiet and go upwards into the mind, and how it starts in the Talmud, and how Rav Yosef Jikatilia in his book Shari Ora, which is written in Spain pre the Tzfat Kabbalistic Renaissance period. And he talks about that, like, what does it mean to go up in the mind? What does it mean to go up in this level? It's a level of thought, the level of thought, whereas he builds, obviously, a person into many levels. And the second to highest level is thought. And he goes into detail about how the place of quietness, a place where nobody has words about, is that place of thought. Now, that's obviously interesting because different Kabbalists seem to look at it differently, but thought is words, it's just mental words. So what's quiet there? I would say in terms of Rav Yosef Jikatilia and his book Shari Ora that I just brought out, he says like going upwards into the mind is going beyond seemingly where wordage still exists. It's going into place of the mind that's pre-wordage, which one might say would be cognizant presence or your consciousness. And he says that no person can go into that area. Rather, you can stay outside of it, throw in a bucket like a well, and bring into the lower level space, which is associated in Hebrew with bina, which is associated with like analyzing and comprehension and listening. He says you can't see, vision doesn't help you there, which is also interesting, which means it's beyond the level of imagination in the mind. So you obviously have it within mind, you have different levels. So one of the most external levels is going to be imagination, which the prophets used. And in the books like this, in Safrutei Chalot, he talks about this sefer, this book talks about this early Kabbalistic text, which is associated with the time of the Talmud and post, because obviously you have a lot of people writing later on in the same style, but how that book talks about journeys into heaven and different the journeys that the sages had and their experiences, and that is all about what they see. One of the main themes there is the eyes and seeing what's called the Merkava, seeing God's chariot, whatever that means, God's chariot. But
it's a visionary experience.
It's a visionary experience, and it seems to be using imagination. Rabbi Yosef Jikatiel in Shari Ora says specifically that use of God connection is a more external. Doesn't mean it's bad. It's in debate of if those are the paths to God worship that we should be using. The Ari says in at least 2 places that that's not for us today, and that there's other ways that we should be doing internal connectivity to God. But that is seen as by Rabbi Yosef Jikatilia as something that's more external, more seen as what called in Hebrew the malchut, the lower receptacle. Help me out here. So the place where you connect to God through the lowest of the 10 levels of connectivity to God. So the more external it is, in a certain sense, the more you use your eyes, because obviously your eyes connect to the external world and giving definition to things. And it seems like this is where the crux of Torah, in a certain sense, lies, is the difference between idol worship and the Jewish God. Where idol worship is your vision is, in a certain sense, is limiting. Going beyond vision is where God lies, in the sense that he can't be bound to limit. And in a certain sense, when you get to a place of this top mind called chokhmah in Hebrew, when you get to the place of that's beyond words and beyond speech, in a certain sense, it's a place that I'm not visualizing there, and I'm not even imagining. I'm not using that part of my mind. I'm listening. He says the way you use the bucket into the well of thought, this area of thought which is beyond my comprehension, is by listening. Which is it's so deep. It's so deep. And when I listen while standing right outside in this place of analysis and comprehension, where there are thoughts, then I can that's when I've connected to that area. Now the Ari has a whole different lexicon. The Ari at Rabbi Isaac Luria has a whole different lexicon, the great 15th century Kabbalist. But it's interesting to see like where he goes and how he thinks you can go higher, or and how you do that and stuff like that. So, but I've also been this is guiding me into the whole session. I told you about I'm learning this book on combining fantasy and Judaism, which is called in Hebrew Phantasy-Yahadut, fantasy Judaism. It's a combination word, by Moshe Rat. He talks about how also like the historical development of reality, of how people used to conceive the world based off of imagination. And so I've been very much diving into this world of imagination versus not imagination, which actually started 2 years ago when I learned in Otniel with Rav Amnon Dekov, what's called in Hebrew Dimayon Mudrach, or guided imaginary meditation, where you actually learn it's a certain method of using imagination. And my teacher, who I'm learning with right now, Rav Pedaya Nagar, wasn't so fond of it. In a certain sense, that imagination has a certain limit to it. He's big into the Lurianic Kabbalah, and Rav Isaac Luria uses imagination not so often. And his other types of worship are used through cognizant mental processes. So, yeah. I just went on a rant for a little while.
It's so interesting. It's so cool to pick something open by mistake and then get to hear what you're thinking on it. Yeah, I've always been
the quieting of the mind also has been something that I've also been focusing on for many reasons, but also in how quieting the mind, getting to a place that's beyond the wordage. Rabbi Isaac Luria, in a certain sense, wants you to go beyond this place that's beyond that level of thought, that there's no words. He wants you to go, in a certain sense, beyond that, to a place in Hebrew that's called Keter, which is a place that is endless, but also totally beyond wordage, to the point where your mind is totally silent, and that allows you to then be a receptacle. Because when you're a place, it's almost like a principle in the world of Kabbalah. I'm sure in all sorts of different spiritual methods. Trying to find like best words to use. Where in order to receive, you have to have prepared yourself to be a vessel for reception. In terms of getting beyond a place that is full, where your brain is full of thoughts. So what's the place that's empty and that's able to receive is the place of the heart. And it's connecting in a certain sense to the heart of the mind, the place that is empty of thought. I've been looking into that also in relation to Eastern traditions, such as Buddhism and yogis of Tibet and yogis in Hinduism, and what practices they use to quiet the mind, what it means for them to quiet the mind, different strategies they use. And it's just been an interesting journey, like how much, obviously, like just wanting to learn about it in general, and also keeping the lines divided obviously not mixing salads between different traditions, and knowing how to authentically, what they did authentically and what they did authentically, and knowing, not just to know, obviously, because I want to try to use these practices, but I recently came up with a document where it was like quieting the mind, and like what different thinkers in Judaism have used, and some of the Kabbalists that I mentioned here. And yeah, sorry.
No, don't apologize. That's awesome. I want to ask, and this is going to be personal. I know that these ideas for you are not just intellectual and abstract and cerebral, but I know that they're very real and really applied. And I wanted to know what you're doing to apply these ideas, and how that's been, and if you're willing to share what that experience has been like for you, for other people who might be interested. It might be quite helpful.
So I guess I'd say two things, or three. One, I always felt like things were very real for me, on the sense of that, maybe even in an unhealthy way. I don't know if the word's unhealthy. My first 2 years in Oraita, the first school I went to, and when I came to Jerusalem, things were almost like too real, where learning Kabbalah was like too much for me, and like feelings like God was everywhere, and wanting to balance that out. And that was a good experience for me to have in order to learn to balance myself. When I came to Othniel, I feel like I had enough of a balance where my learning, whether it was law or Talmud, and learning things that had more spiritual connotations, I felt like were kind of unifying. And I know my teachers of Yair Eisenstock and of Ariel Mays in Oraita very much were on this journey with me. They know this is something that I was going through, and they were very much there and guiding me. And as a kind of like I don't know if the word is like spiritually, no, I don't want to use that word. I was maturing in like a more internal way, and it kind of helped things more simmer down, but become deeper and less like external, superficial, but like feeling things are so real. Like it was more this process where things are less like that and more deep, and more how I can be impacted as a person. And the thing is, those things are such real changes for me in my first 2 years in Israel, that I felt like I was naturally becoming like a better person. Whereas when things became more internal now, like I feel like I was easier or more easily doing things that I wasn't happy about, action-wise, like being less of a good person. So things, while I was continued to learn Kabbalah, they felt very real for me, in the sense that they're enriching my knowledge. I felt like they're very much enriching like how I looked at Torah, how I was viewing different concepts in Torah. Like I saw the word, well, in the book of Genesis, and it like meant so much to me. I saw the word, for God, for Yud Kei Vav Kei, I saw the word for God, Elohim, and it had so much meaning. So all of a sudden my Judaism was full of meaning that wasn't just intellectual. It was very much, I felt much more alive. I felt like I was living something that was very deep and meaningful. The thing is, like, I'm not sure how much it had like a practical base. Now it did, because like I knew, like when I would put on tefillin, my phylacteries, I knew that it was a very enriched experience. But like, I don't know, like things felt just very abstract. When I got to O'Neill and started learning with Abdaya, he gave me a lexicon, a much more down to earth language, and like totally like was decoding the abstract meaning into practical self knowledge and macro historical knowledge, and just like bringing things very much down, where I felt like on one hand, things were not just abstract ideas, but I was able to really connect to what things meant on a human level and not just Kabbalah is all about God. Like I very much in the last few years have been much more connecting to Kabbalah than Hasidut, than Hasidism, in a very interesting way, because usually Hasidism, people have a much easier time with it. They're like, oh, it's so much more practical, it's so much more down to earth, it's so much more easily read. Now, one, I agree that's probably much more easily read, but I feel like Kabbalah is, in the way I've been learning it, is so much more like practical, is so much more refined. In a certain sense, I feel like almost Hasidism is outdated, while Kabbalah, like, it almost is it's just so much about the human. Obviously, there's things in Hasidism that are built on Kabbalah, so they are also endless to me in that sense. But it also depends on what type of Kabbalah and what time period and whatever. But like when I'm learning this early book of Safrut Chalot, the Chalot books, it's not necessarily something I'm learning for me practically. It's something that I'm learning because I want to learn how the beginnings of Kabbalah as it draws upon those texts. Because then it also enriches my Kabbalah and how I also understand how Kabbalists understood the spiritual process they're going through, even if they're different. And just making my Kabbalah much more accurate. So that when I can say, like, Yosef Jikatili and Shari Ora, when he was picking up upon certain texts, I know, like, those texts are, I've read them, I know what they're about, I know if he is, like, if I see the simple reading of a text is different than what he's saying, then I know that he's either been influenced by somewhere or is making a chiddush. He's making a new idea. And that also enriches my accuracy in knowing to be able to divide of what systems people used to do, being able to know what spiritual practices people do now and how it differs and what we can do more now. And it's just a lot. It's so much more refined that way. So there's things that I learned that are more that based, just because I want to be exposed. I want to see what's there in order to be able to understand people that I actually use their spiritual practices today, not because I necessarily want to use their spiritual practices. It's very interesting. It's like, on a certain sense, there's the Bahir, which I've been reading recently, and on a certain sense, it doesn't necessarily have practical methods. Like, it's not like a YouTube video where they're telling you a method of how to do XYZ, but there are meaningful concepts there that I also internalize for myself. That's on one level. And on another level, also knowing that this is a source that other later Kabbalists delved upon, and that gives me that background. So lately, because of my studies with Rufdaya, so I've been very much connecting to Lurianic Kabbalah and how to use it specifically in prayer. The prayers in the morning, afternoon, evening, and at night before one goes to sleep. So that's something that I've been really focusing on within the last 2 years, specifically in the Lurianic sense, but just in general, trying to learn what other Kabbalists' practices were as well. So like Rabbi Yosef Jikatilia and Shari Ora, like I very much try to pay attention to what his practices are and what his ladder and map, spiritual ladder and map are. Like he says, like you can go up to there, you can't go up to there. This is how you do it. This is how you don't. Now, a lot of times you can just read that book and just to read the book and read the concepts, but you're not like paying attention to those nuances. So I'm very much trying to read each of the books I'm reading in that kind of nuanced way, which is something that I learned from Dea to do. In all sorts of texts, like in the Zohar, like from time they gave me some rebuke. It's like one of those stories where like you get to say like I was a silly student and the rabbi was like he said to me, he gave me some sort of constructive criticism where I was reading a passage from the Zohar, or we were in our class, and it said the word omek, which is in Hebrew depth. And he started talking about a depth that's like not below, but like above. So, which is a very deep concept. And I immediately was like, oh yeah, I remember in this text it started talking about that concept in terms of the sphere of Chokhmah. Now, I know the listeners may not know what that means, but whatever. No, he says that I was like, oh, it's connected to that concept, that Kabbalah concept. And he's like, Yehuda, like, there's a reason that it didn't say that. There's a reason it didn't say that. Rather, the Zohar uses a lot more pictures, a lot more imagery, a lot more metaphor. So, like, stay in the metaphor. Like, that's where, like, the richness lies. So it's just like knowing to have a nuanced reading. That doesn't mean it was wrong. It meant it was like, right now we're just staying in the metaphor, like be in it, like take in from that. And for me, that was very much like, oh wow, like there's the nuanced reading and being nuanced in the Zohar enough to leave things kind of also as they are to really see the beauty of it. So yeah.
You said something which was kind of like counter-narrative or counterintuitive, and I want to ask you to elaborate on it. You said that you feel for yourself that Kabbalah is more practical and more human, more anthropocentric, and Hasidut you feel is more abstract or related to the divine, which is like totally the opposite of like everyone like says just the exact opposite. So I would love for you to expound on that.
Okay. One, I want to say that I very much enjoy learning Hasidism, and I very much see that as a focus of my study and how I live my life and how it's had a huge impact on my life. And it was also kind of the way in which I was more exposed to Kabbalah, because it's more acceptable to learn, because it's easier to read. It is easier to read. And the lexicon isn't as complex. But I feel like because I definitely take things from, like right now I'm learning the Maggid of Mezrich's Likutei Karim. And I've been making a document, trying to note, I made 2 documents. One trying to see his Kabbalistic, what's a word for chidush?
Innovation or novelty?
Innovation. I've been trying to follow his Kabbalistic innovations and his spiritual practice innovations in his, what's called in Hebrew, Avodat Hashem. And in doing so, I've been very much connecting to a lot of what he says. So I don't want to get the wrong message across that I think it's irrelevant at all, because I feel like there's obviously a lot of Kabbalistic stuff, that innovations there that is totally relevant and in a lot of positive ways. However, I do feel like a lot of it is 2 things. One, there's so many different sages in Hasidism that develop all sorts of different methods. Those individual methods are amazing to use in your worship. I feel like Kabbalah, though, is also, each Kabbalist has his style of worship, but it also gives you more the basic language. It gives you more of the basic map. And use the map. Hasidut is just one way of using that map. But there's, be Yehuda and use the map. be yourself and use that map. Now learn how to use the map from all the people that were before. So from Hasidic rabbis and from Kabbalistic rabbis. But I feel like Kabbalah is not just for people who are in Europe between these centuries. I feel like Kabbalah is like this line of yarn that's like continuing, and different people are tapping into different parts of it in different timelines. And Hasidism is like tapping into it through one time period. Now, obviously it continues today, but like it continues today really through Neo-Hasidism on the spiritual level, and maybe on the external level through Hasidic sects in America and England, Israel, Canada, or whatever. Now, I just feel like a lot of times those concepts are, I don't know, I feel like Kabbalah isn't just for that time period. So, yeah, I don't know. Like, I just feel like in Hasidut, there's a lot of things I just don't relate to in terms of how they worship God. I feel like there's a lot of, it's just like the language they use. Now the thing is that I'm also learning those texts, and I enjoy learning those texts, and they also influence me in how I want to practice and worship. But yeah, that's what I have to say.
I definitely don't want to give anyone the impression that you're like anti-Hasidut or anything. But it seems to me that you're saying that there's something more primordial and archetypal or ancient about Kabbalah, which by extension makes its messages and makes its metaphors more timeless. Whereas Hasidut you're seeing is more time sensitive and applied. And I think that's an interesting perspective. And I
like if I could say, I feel like the
please.
Ari, Rabbi Isaac Luria, is also a lot more holistic than a lot of the Kabbalah of Hasidism.
Interesting. So. Is there like, because you mentioned the Ari and some others, is there like a select group of Kabbalists that you most connect to as spiritual mentors and teachers? Is there like a cadre of
Well, I do feel like I'm still kind of in the beginning of all my journeys, so I don't know enough. Like I'm learning a lot now, but there's so many teachers out there that I might connect to that I don't know if I connect to them. So, I mean, right now, in terms of who I look up to in that spiritual sense, I would say one is the Maggid Mezrich. Not as like the first top one, it's just the list off coming to my mind. The Ari would probably be the top one in terms of a text. I think Rav Pedaya would, Rav Ariel, Rav Yair, and Rav Amnon and Rav Ram would be in terms of who has helped me in my practice in the modern sense. And Rav Yosef Chikatilia, I've been, and the Zohar. I'd say those three Kabbalists, the Ari, Rav Yosef Chikatilia, and the Maggid, if you want to put them in that bandwagon. Those are like the main people who right now I'm really much drinking from.
Do you care to share a bit about each of those three, like to sort of encapsulate what it is in their way of practice and way of thinking, which talks to you in the way it does?
Which three?
Rabbi Yosef Chikatilia.
If you include the Zohar, then I mentioned four. The Zohar,
Rabbi Yosef Chikatilia, the Arizal, and the
Rabbi
Maggid.
Yosef Chikatilia. Okay, so the Maggid, I've been very much owner of Cook.
I feel like this list is going to get longer as we go.
Yeah. The Maggid, I've been connecting through his Torahs on Avodat Hashem, mostly, and how he looks at Tefillah and Yirat Shamayim.
If I could just trouble you to translate the words into English.
I'll do this again. The Maggid I very much connect to in terms of his on his perspective of prayer and how he worships in terms of how he conceives certain ideas and how he perceives prayer to a certain level. Like there's certain things that I don't use, obviously, and also how he sees the awe of heaven. Awe,
or AWE?
AWE, the fear of heaven. Rabbi Yosef Jikatilia gives the most basic map of Kabbalah, and he is very much using the same map as the Zohar, but he has a lot of also deep things about how to approach the basic concepts. And I've learned a lot from him. The Ari, I've very much been learning through Rav Daya, or the Ari through Rav Kook through Rav Daya. No, I mean also just the Ari shot, like the simple reading of the Ari, but also mixed with of some Rav Kook and how Rav Daya understands them, and bringing the Ari is much more nuanced than all of the other Kabbalists before him. Nuanced, not better or worse, and just in a way that it's more complex. And the more complex it is, it makes it in a certain sense more accurate. Because if I have 10 spiritual centers within the human condition, let's say, the Ari has a much larger system. He has more levels of things. He has different types of concepts that he uses. I'm debating if I should say the concepts or not, but it just won't be very much understood by some people. And because of that, the human is so complex. I'll give you an example. If Rabbi Yosef Jikatilia, he says that jealousy is associated with the Sphira of Yisod foundation. So in the Ari, it's more complex because you have the Yisod within each of the 10 Sphira are the 10 Sphira. So you have that Yisod within all the 10, and you have them within the 5 Partsufim, within the 5 godly personas, or whatever. Because of that, so I know when I'm talking about different types of jealousy. Now, if I just stayed in Rabbi Yosef Jikatilia, there's macro jealousy, and it's in the Yisod. But if I talk about jealousy in general, if I then talk about more nuanced jealousy, there's different types of jealousy. There's jealousy in Bina, and there's jealousy in that, all different types of aspects. So it's much more rich. So that's why the Ari, I find, that's why his practice is so much more human also. And he talks about that, while Hasidism doesn't really develop that either. And also the Ari uses the practice of what's called the soul root. How I connect to God is through the different levels of the soul. While in older texts, such as in Sefer Hello, it's more through angels. And even with Yosef Jikatilia, it's through the Sphiro, but like it's less, almost like a little less. It's more God-centered. The Ari, you really feel like he brings it down on all levels. Now, I think the secret of this book is that it's also what he talks about God about is also a deeper reflection on humans. But yeah.
Thank you. One of the things which I've always really, really enjoyed learning from you and being in conversation with you, and I've learned so much from you. So thank you, firstly. That you have such an incredible way of shifting paradigms, or sort of bringing new lenses and new metaphors to issues which were sort of seen in one way for a while, which may have been sort of stagnant or underdeveloped or immature, and then you have a way of sort of changing a perspective. And it seems like that's something which has been a lot of your journey about reframing ideas and seeing things differently. So I want to know, was there like one moment or one change of paradigm or perspective or metaphor that really like was a penny drop moment for you? Is there such like a...
Yeah. In my first year in Israel, I learned that God is not just a guy in the sky.
That was the big one.
Yeah.
And that was in Otniel.
I was in Oraita my first year.
Oh, in Oraita. Right. LMI, rather what?
David Aaron. I feel like if I say it'll be made less wondrous. God's name is Yud Kei Vav Kei in Hebrew. Sorry, viewers.
The tetragrammaton.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that.
See, none of these translations actually help anyone.
Right. The 4-letter name, the tetragrammaton. So, Shem Havaya, the name of Yud Kei Vav Kei, is being. It's the beer. So in a certain sense, like God is life itself and beyond. In a certain sense, that means we're living God. Because I'd prefer if you don't post, honestly. Like if you can edit this out, because I don't know, like I feel like it makes it less intimate and special. But
I feel like it's a very important truth, though. I feel like that's a real like crux of the issue, and that paradigm shift is an important one.
Okay. So then edit that part out.
No, I want people to know that you thought it shouldn't have gone in.
Okay, interesting. Just what David Aaron taught me, and it's in a certain sense that we think we're the subject and God is an object, but really God's the subject, and we're the objects of His mind, and that He bees us into being, just like we be our own imaginative characters into being. And once we stop imagining, the character is gone. In the same sense, like God is our source of being, in that sense that His very life force and imagination is enlivening us. So it's something very much, very, very real within us. Something very much more alive. It's not just somebody that I talk to and ask for things. That's also another one is breaking God as the image of God as a genie, and prayer as just requests to get things. That was another one of like the penny drop, but like tefillah, prayer as reflective. Tefillah, as it comes from the word lehit palel, which is a reflexive verb. So you're really doing something to yourself. You're doing an internal process as well. It's something that also is very much sums up how I saw God in prayer. Now, even when I thought He was a God in the sky, I thought like I had, I believed in Him. I always wanted to know how to talk to Him. I didn't know how. It's so funny. I came to Israel my first year, like with all these, like, I want to know how to talk to God. I want to want. A lot of I want to want. I didn't want to actually pray 3 times a day, but I wanted to want to pray 3 times a day. So that means I have to find like enough meaning in it and what it has to provide. And that's all. As I say that, like I like that, and there's no problem with like the question that people need to ask themselves, which people are asking themselves, is what does this do to me? What does it give to me? Now, obviously that sounds selfish. Well, God is not to be just for your own. No, but first it does. First, it needs to be like, why is this revolutionary? Why does God want me to do this? Why does God think that this is something that I benefit from? So what's my benefit? Now, obviously just staying there, if you're thinking, well, it's not benefiting me, so no. Like there's certain times where there's also, through knowing that I benefit, I also get to know how things are also beyond me, and things are beyond immediate gratification. Things are beyond reception of things that fill your life that are also empty. There's just like so many. Yeah, God is. This is another deep idea. That in a certain sense there's a large minus in the world. It's a large minus. And that's like one of the aspects that humans are always growing, they're becoming, they're never perfect because there's always a minus. That is what sparks our growth and our yearning and our aspiration. We're always yearning. We're always, because there's something lacking. Now that major minus, that macro minus, we want to feel it. We want to feel that hole filled. And God is the macro plus. Now there's other pluses. I could, fill my life with all sorts of things, and a lot of them can be harmful, and a lot of them are also good things. Now those good things are also just garments of this macro plus. So family and love and justice and mercy and connectivity and wisdom and understanding and going beyond yourself, and all these different aspects, that they are the macro plus, and they fill your life with something that is very much real. That's the thing, like I could believe in God, but he's not actually real to me in the sense that like I actually live according to his light. Rather, I just live and he's secondary. And that's like the ultimate call of, in a certain sense, Kabbalah, is going beyond yourself in so many ways. That Kabbalah talks about that in ways that people also look at it, and certain concepts that you hear when you're a kid from like Sephardi rabbis that you're like, I don't connect to that. Like, Mesirut Nefesh, giving up yourself for something that's beyond you, like dying for this sanctification of heaven. Like, what are these concepts that are so out of date? But like they really, like in the most recent years, I've been reconnecting to those ideas in the place of like me getting to the point of, oh, I understand, or I connect to the message that lays behind it. Now, unfortunately, the people that are talking about them, I didn't feel like maybe talked about them in such a helpful way. But those concepts where that are very much enriching, and I just feel like there's also a lot of misconceptions. So, yeah.
I wanna ask one more question, if your time will permit. I want to ask one more question in regards to Kabbalah, and then I want to shift gears to what your present projects are and what your future goals and aspirations and hopes are. Okay, so the last question I want to ask in regards to Kabbalah, and by the way, I think it's great that you brought up tefillah, prayer, and I know that it's something that you've put in a lot of thought and effort and time into development of that. And it's something which I'm very passionate about as well. And I do want to actually sort of book you now for some time in advance to sit down and have a full conversation just about tefillah, just about prayer, if you'll give me that honor, just to pick your mind on prayer. But I like that the focus of this conversation has become about Kabbalah and your journey. So I'm going to try and stick to that for the rest of the conversation. I really appreciate the way that you sort of use your constructs and concepts and the way that you flesh them out. I've had an experience in my own study where there's been like a couple core themes, concept processes, which I keep coming back to as reference points and processing my new information through them. For example, a big one for me is the process of going from a place of self-centeredness to bitul or nullification, and then that leading to yichud or achdut, and then whatever. That's a journey. That's a process for me, which I sort of see as a glasses on everything. I was wondering, is there some sort of key process, concept, idea, framework that is sort of at the core, at the kernel of your thought in regards to Kabbalah that things get passed through?
Well, I guess you're saying like I learned Kabbalah as like are there certain ideas I'm looking out for, or is there a certain idea that I specifically try to process the ideas through?
Either way, like either something that like when you come across in text, you're like, oh, I found that thing again, or something that you're using as like a tool to filter, and it may be a different concept. I don't know if my question is like specific enough, but
I kind of get your question. Well, I feel like two things. One, when I first learned in Oraita Kabbalah, it was very much more like the philosophy of Kabbalah. And it always bothered me that my rabbi would say, according to the Kabbalah, and he wouldn't like say be accurate. He wouldn't like talk about who, when, be a little more nuanced. It's like, according to the Kabbalah, yeah, okay. Well, like the Kabbalah says a million things. Like it could be anybody. Like, and 7 years later, or even 6 years later, I'm learning with a different Kabbalist rabbi. And he's talking about those ideas that I heard in the first year. And I'm kind of just like, oh, wow. Like there's a lot of, even though there's so many different teachers, a lot of them are tapping into a certain philosophy that obviously people look at things differently, how they look at the sphere, how they look at Tzimtzum, contraction, how they look at all sorts of different things. A lot of them look at them similarly, and a lot of them look at them differently. But there is still certain macro concepts that you can say are shared. So in a certain sense, I'm doing two things. One is I'm looking for those macro concepts. I'm not actively looking. But like if I notice it, I'm like, oh wow, here's a concept that I've learned about in my Jewish Kabbalah class, that I'm like in the philosophy Kabbalah class, and I'm like, oh, like this is like a concept that seems to be recurring. And the second concept that I think of is that I don't try to look for those concepts. I rather try to hear what each text is saying, because I feel like a lot of times we lose out on what the Kabbalist innovations are when we just say, oh, well, he's talking about that concept. But if you look in the text, it's like, well, he never talked about that concept. And I feel like there's a reason he's not talking about that concept. It could be obviously that they're hinting to it, and it could be that through historical development, he also has, some sort of prophetic meaning. Both of those could be, and I legitimately look at those texts and also bring them into my life. But for me, I also like to say, like, when Safrudai Chalot is talking about Chokhmah, about wisdom, it's not necessarily talking about the sphere of Chokhmah. I'm not going to just like jump and be like, it's a sphere. It's like, no, like he has his own concepts. And knowing that each Kabbalist has his own concepts just makes their Kabbalistic understanding much more rich, much more nuanced, knowing that different Kabbalists understand things differently. And in the Kabbalah class, the intro to Kabbalah class that I taught, one of the first things I taught in the first 3 classes is the development of Kabbalah, that there is a development, and how you can understand that when something is supposed to be, godly or whatever. And I feel like in that sense, one of the things I try to do is ask myself, what is their map? And a lot of times I can say, oh, wow, they have a similar map as them. Like, it doesn't, like, I'm not trying to say they're different in order to deliberately say they're different. I'm saying, oh, let's see where there's similarities and where there are differences. So one of the projects that I'm working on, like I did, one of the projects that I've been working on, I've been learning Shari Ora by Rabbi Yosef Jigatilia for like 3-4 years. I've been learning it for a long time because many reasons. One is because I've been trying to really see within the text who he's influenced by. So I do this, and I do for each Kabbalistic and Hasidic book that I've been reading recently. I've been making at least one or a few documents, and I have my computer open while I'm learning them, and I write down there certain themes that come up, concepts, innovations that they make. And when there's a quote from a book, so like Shari Ora, I have a document that's called Shari Ora and Sefer Yetzirah, the book of creation. And every time that he either quotes Sefer Yetzirah by saying its name, or quotes a concept that is mentioned, and that is the first time it appears is in Sefer Yetzirah. So I compare the two. I put them both texts in a graph, in a table, and it helps me see how he understood that text. And that then gives me 2 levels of Avodat Hashem, of worshiping God, 2 different methods of how to worship God. I have Sefer Yetzirah, I have the simple reading of Sefer Yetzirah, and I have what Joseph Jikatilia's innovations were on Sefer Yetzirah. So when the Sefer Yetzirah mentions a certain concept, I can understand that concept and how Sefer Yetzirah presents it, and I can also, or how I think Sefer Yetzirah understood it, and how Shari Ora understood it. And that then gives me a much richer concept of this, of a certain practice or of a certain language. It becomes much more rich, much more nuanced, much more accurate. And that is what helps in God worship. When I say God worship, it's obviously not just prayer, it's just living and understanding and all that stuff. But so that's like, those are some of the projects that I've been working on. Is what I've been trying to do for the last few years is go to the earliest. Like, I'm enjoying learning Ari. I learn every Friday with Daya. I learn Ari. And I've been, some Friday nights, I've been opening some books and learning more Ari. Now, the thing is that I feel like when I hear Daya speak about his concepts, he's read also the earlier texts, and therefore it's so much more rich. He has, if the Ari is influenced by the Zohar, he knows what the innovations of the Ari are based off of what the Zohar does and does not say. But in order to do that, you have to know the Zohar. If I want to know the innovations of the Zohar I have to go back and say what text of the Zohar I have in order to see his innovations, in order to really embrace the practice of the Zohar. And know, and if I have this, which is one of the earlier Kabbalistic texts, or is what is considered a Kabbalistic text, is Safrudei Chalot. So I know, like, based off of the Ari says I shouldn't necessarily use the practices that are in here. Now I have to know then it then is, that helps me really know then what the Ari really wants. Because if I know what's used in here, then I know what he says not to use, where that is in myself, like like Rav Chaim Vital has a whole map in his book Shari Kedusha about different lines within human grasp that we can use in our God worship. So one of them is angels, one of them is soul, one of them is godly emanations. There's all sorts of different paths. And the Ari says use this path and that path. Now I know also not to use that path, but by knowing this path, it just makes your whole world of maps much more rich. And I know that map exists. I know that it's something that is better not to be used for X and Y reasons according to that thinker. So what I've been doing the last few years is trying to go back to the earlier texts. So I've been focusing on Sefer Chalot. I've been focusing on texts up according to, it obviously is up for academic debate, but texts like Sefer HaKaneh and Sefer HaTmuna and Sefer Pliya, like all sorts of different texts that like are earlier that all these Kabbalists also knew about. That by reading them, one, I'm learning about where the concept started. Like by learning Sefer Yetzirah, I knew that the concept Vav Ktavo started in Sefer Yetzirah, and I knew that concept, like, it isn't necessarily that as the 10th Sefirot as we know it is the same 10th Sefirot that's in Sefer Yetzirah, and that the Vav Ksavot there, that concept is a different concept because it understands the Sefirot in a different way. And that allows me to really see what the authentic practice of Sefer Yetzirah, and I can also gain from that. And then I can also gain from the person who interprets it in a certain way. So I have then two different enriched ways of seeing that concept. So that's like one practice. I was just going, but I'm also trying to read also the major texts. So I am trying to learn Ari. I'm trying to learn the Ramak's Pardes Rimonim. I'm trying to learn Shari Oran, the text of Yosef Jekatilia, and Hasidut. I'm trying to also keep myself not just early, but also spread out, where I am making those marks on chronologically, but also trying to know the major texts at the same time. So, and I also try opening for each book like a certain document. Like for Sefer Chalot, like I have documents on the different texts that are in there, because it's not just one book, it's a book with many little books, and trying to chart out what the different concepts are that exist there. And it's I don't necessarily share them, they're just there for me to know. And if I later reference, if I want to look up, how does Sefer Chalot look at angels or whatever, so then I can look up, or that specific angels, and I can go to my text and I see like what its concept was. And it has just dry intellectual implications, but it can also have spiritual, real life, how I live and practice implications.
That is an epic project. And I really hope you don't keep that to yourself. I really hope that makes it out to us plebs one day.
Well, it's interesting. Like I thought to myself actually the other day, like if somebody already did this, would I be doing this? Now, it's interesting because you have like maftech inyanim. You have an index at the back of some of these books where it's like, okay, you want to look, but sometimes they're not always as nuanced as I want. Also, I want to go through it. I want to see it for myself. So it's almost like other people can also do this. Like in a certain sense, I don't want to do it for them, because if they want an enriched, like for example, Daya taught me, and also I saw that Gershom Shalom says this as well, that the Shekhinah, the divine presence of God before the Zohar, is seen as It's not necessarily something, the female detachment of God. It's a male representation of God. When I say male, I mean it has a certain connotation, but whatever. And okay, he taught me that. Now that's good. I know what to look out for. But then I also myself want to look at those texts and see, like, I'm paying attention now when I see those texts that could be a thing. So on one hand, it's like, yes, I want to know this so I can teach others. And I also want people to now know what to look out for when they're learning. Yeah. That's some of my projects that I've been doing.
Nice. I want to ask where do you see this going forward? What's your chazon? What's your vision?
Going forward, well, one, I would like to teach more formally. I think I just want to teach. Right now, I'm kind of at like all ages kind of thing. Not necessarily just Kabbalah, like Torah in general. I want to teach, younger people, because that's also where I feel like I was lacking. Like I myself needed teachers when I was younger. More enriched teachers. Secondly, I would like to teach also gap year students or people who are older than high school, because I'd also like to teach deeper ideas. Like I would like to teach deep ideas to younger kids, but like in a language that is more fixed for them and their age. I want to teach more nuance and deeper things that require more maturity. So I would also want to teach older. I also want to teach not just gap year people, but also people that are much older that can even delve deeper than just the normal gap year person can. So I kind of like would like to get like, my normal day-to-day job as a teacher, either for one of those ages, and also, have like an afternoon job where I'm teaching somewhere for a different age, and maybe like a study group at my house, once or twice a week, where you can have something like that for a different age group to really try to spread around the ages. I feel like that would be something cool.
Nice.
Now, the enriched vision of what I really want to teach and what I feel like is like what I really want to bring is, I feel like one of the innovations of Judaism is the commandments, is the actual deeds that we have to do. And that one of the goals of Torah is, in the most deep sense, is for the day-to-day routine acts in our living in this world is to be something that's meaningful. And I feel like just learning Kabbalah, you're not necessarily learning how to take the light and put it into vessels, how to put it into practice. But just with the practice, and you have empty vessels that are not enlightened. And therefore, I would like to teach Kabbalah. I would like to teach vessels, which is law and Talmud and things like that. And I would like to teach them also both in a synchronized language, because the quality of your externality is based off of the quality of your internal world, and the quality of your internal world is also needs a certain external base. It's almost all for nothing if you don't have a external fruition. So yeah.
Nice. Before we go out with a parting message, is there a place where people can find you online? Some social media, somewhere you're uploading material? Where do you want to direct listeners if they want to access more of you on the interwebs?
Well, the classes that I give on YouTube are, as you know, are only accessible by link. So there's not actually any place. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on.
How do people reach out to you if they want access to the classes that you're giving online?
Email. email me at lcat07@yahoo.com. If you want, you can put that email
I'll put that in the description.
In the description. So
nice. And just so people should know, you have like an ongoing series of introduction to Kabbalah, very thorough and in-depth and rich, and I've listened to many of them, and they're in Hebrew for listeners to be aware of. Is that correct?
Correct.
And we hope to get a bit of an English version of that, even if a truncated one, even if just one video of you introducing your understanding of Kabbalah to the Sikhism Union English-speaking audience. That's a request. And maybe now's a good time. I mean, you're very busy during this time, but but that would be very cool to get from you. And lastly, is there any final words that you want to give someone who is seeking on the journey? Any thought that you'd like to impart before we end?
Think about your life and think about what your life's meanings are and how you can connect to something that's beyond you and why we came to this world.
Nice. Thank you so much, Yehuda. That was phenomenal.
Thank you, Zevi.
I so enjoyed that. And I hope to see you
I
again
very
really
much enjoyed
soon.
it too. Yeah, definitely. When all this is over.
That would be really nice.